Sheriff auctioned the fat orphan to highest bidder mountain man, paid with a single gold nugget, worth a fortune, $10 for the fat orphan, Sheriff Clayton Morse barked, and the square answered with laughter sharp as broken glass. Goldstone, California, 1879. Noon heat shimmered over the clapboard fronts. The assay office ticked like a clock with a guilty conscience. On a rough planked platform before the courthouse, Lily Patterson stood with her hands bound in front of her and her chin lifted because anything lower would be a blow she refused to give. Men in sweat-stained hats jostled one another, tossing numbers like bones to a dog. 5 if she'll shovel, someone called. 3 if she don't eat, another said, and the crowd snorted as if cruelty were cleverness. Morse spun his badge on its pin, a silver star grimed by greasy fingers. "She's strong and simple," he crowed, as if he were selling a mule. "Town can't feed layabouts. Highest bidder takes her to honest work." The word honest cracked when it left his mouth. A woman in a bonnet looked away. A boy clutched his mother's skirt. Somewhere, a church bell counted the hour and was ignored. Lily's breath came shallow, tasting of dust and shame. 6 months since the North Fork mine collapsed and took her parents with it. 6 months of sleeping on charity floors and washing steps that were never clean enough. At the edge of the crowd, men from the mine office watched without blinking, their ledgers fat on their laps, as if this too could be entered on a line and balanced. Then iron rang on stone. Hoofbeats slowed. A black horse pushed through the press, foam flecking its bit. The rider swung down tall, raw-boned, a rifle slung easy across his back, and his coat smelling of cold river and pine. Nathaniel Blackwood didn't look at the sheriff first. He looked at the girl. "What is this?" he asked, voice low enough that men leaned in to hear it. Moore smiled like a man who's just found a vein of greed. "A legal sale, Blackwood. You want to bid? You better speak up." Nate reached into his coat and set something in the sheriff's open palm. Sunlight struck it. The square went silent. A gold nugget, rough and bright as a new moon, big as a goose egg. "This ends now," he said. The crowd held its breath. Lily did too. If a life can turn on a heartbeat, perhaps it turns here. And you, where in the world are you when this story begins? Lily Patterson had always been easy to overlook, round-faced, soft-bodied, the kind of girl people remembered only as the big one who worked hard. Her parents had died deep in the mine collapse that swallowed 30 men, leaving her with nothing but the weight of debt and the echo of their voices. When the charity fund dried up, the town decided she was a burden. Sheriff Clayton Morse, greedy and slick as a copperhead, found a way to make profit out of pity. "If no one will hire her," he'd said at the saloon, "someone can buy her." That was how the morning of the auction arrived, with Lily dragged from the poorhouse and forced to stand before her neighbors like a criminal. She tried not to cry, but the jeers cracked something inside her. "Fat like that, she'll eat her wages in a week." "She should pay us to take her." Each word landed like a slap. Her fingers tightened around the frayed hem of her dress, the last thing her mother had sewn. The sheriff kept calling for bids, sweat shining under his hat brim, the crowd roaring for entertainment. But then the laughter broke, because the man who had ridden in wasn't from town. His boots were mountain-made, worn from years of climbing shale and ice. His face was weather-dark, his hair tied back, his eyes so steady they made the crowd uneasy. Nathaniel Nate Blackwood, gold hunter, soldier, hermit, a name whispered with a mix of fear and admiration. He walked straight to the platform, each step deliberate. "What's her crime?" he asked. Morse chuckled nervously. "No crime, Mr. Blackwood, just civic duty. Girl needs a home, town needs relief. Everyone wins." Nate's gaze cut through the words. "You're selling her like livestock." The sheriff spread his hands. "Don't make it ugly now. Law's law. You gonna bid or not?" The crowd leaned closer. Nate looked at Lily, her cheeks flushed, tears carving clean paths through dust. He saw the fear, yes, but also the stubborn light beneath it, the same light he'd seen in soldiers who refused to give up the trench even when the world was burning. Without another word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out that gold nugget. It caught the sun like a spark from God's forge. The crowd gasped. Morse's jaw fell open. "Sweet mercy, is that—" "Enough," Nate said. "That buys her freedom and your silence." The sheriff swallowed, greed shining in his eyes. He clutched the nugget as if afraid it might disappear. "Deal." He yanked the rope from Lily's wrists, the rough fibers leaving red marks behind. "She's yours." The words hit her like another chain, but Nate didn't grab her arm. He simply said, "You're free. You can come with me or not. Choice is yours." For a moment she couldn't speak. Freedom was a word she hadn't tasted in months. She looked at the faces around her, mocking, cruel, eager to see her crawl. Then she looked at the man before her, hard, unreadable, but not unkind. "I'll go," she whispered. Nate nodded once. "Then come." He helped her onto the horse, his touch careful, steady. As they rode out of Goldstone, the townsmen's laughter died behind them, replaced by whispers. "She'll never last a week with him. He paid a fortune for a fool." But Lily didn't turn back. The wind caught her hair, carrying away the dust of humiliation. Ahead, the mountains rose like a promise rough, untamed, and waiting. The road out of Goldstone wound upward through pine and red rock, climbing toward the high ridges where the air thinned and the noise of the world fell away. Lily sat behind Nate on his horse, hands clenched around the saddle horn, every jolt of the trail rattling through her bones. The town was already a smear of dust below them, the jeers, the laughter, the auctioneer's voice fading like a bad dream. Nate hadn't said much since they left. He rode with the kind of stillness that came from long habit, his gaze always scanning the horizon. The rifle across his back looked as much a part of him as his breath. For the first hour, she was too nervous to speak, but the silence pressed on her until she had to break it. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly. "Why pay all that for someone you don't know?" He didn't look back. "Because it wasn't right." "That's not much of an answer." He gave a faint shrug. "It's the only one I've got." The horse picked its way along a narrow pass, hooves crunching over loose gravel. Down below, a river cut silver through the valley. Lily stole a glance at the man in front of her broad shoulders beneath a worn leather coat, dark hair streaked with sun, a jaw set like stone. He looked dangerous, but not in the way the sheriff or the drunks in town did. His danger was quiet, the kind that could protect or destroy depending on which way you faced it. "I can't pay you back," she said after a while. "I didn't ask you to." "But that gold it must have been worth—" He cut her off gently. "Gold's just metal. It can't buy back a man's conscience." She fell silent again. The words echoed in her chest. When they reached a stream, Nate dismounted and helped her down. The air smelled of spruce and wet earth. "We'll rest here," he said. Lily knelt to drink. the cold water biting her throat. She caught her reflection trembling in the surface, hair tangled, dress torn, eyes too big for her face. She hardly recognized herself. Nate unpacked bread and dried meat from his saddlebag and handed her half. "Eat. You'll feel better." She hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know," he said simply. They ate in silence while the wind whispered through the pines. As they rode again, the sky began to darken, clouds gathering like bruises over the peaks. When the first drops of rain fell, Nate pulled a heavy coat from his pack and tossed it to her. "Put that on before you freeze." She slipped into it too large, smelling of smoke and pine, and for the first time in months, warmth sank deep into her bones. By dusk, they reached a clearing where a small cabin stood against the slope, sturdy and weathered, smoke curling from its chimney. "This is it," Nate said. "My place." Lily stared. The house was bigger than she expected, built of thick logs, surrounded by stacks of firewood and a garden fenced with care. Beyond it, the forest stretched endless and wild. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Nate led the horse into the shed. "Not much, but it's safe." He opened the cabin door for her. Inside smelled of cedar and fire. There was a stone hearth, a broad table, shelves of books and tools, everything neat and purposeful. "You can rest here," he said. "No one will bother you." She looked at him, uncertain. "And what do you want me to do?" "Whatever you choose," he said. "Eat, sleep, leave tomorrow, or stay. You're free." The words made her throat ache. Free. She had almost forgotten what that felt like. That night, while rain drummed softly on the roof, Lily lay under a real blanket for the first time in months. Through the crack of the door, she saw Nate sitting by the fire, whittling wood, his face lit by the flames. He looked like a man carrying the weight of ghosts, but he was the first soul in years who had looked at her and not seen a joke. And as the storm passed outside, Lily realized she wasn't afraid anymore. The days that followed were quiet in a way Lily had never known. The mountain had its own rhythm wind whispering through the pines, the crack of axes splitting wood, the rush of the creek below. For the first time since her parents' death, she woke without fear of voices shouting her name in anger. Nate rose before sunrise each day, stoking the fire and leaving hot coffee on the table before heading out to hunt or tend the traps. Lily would wake to the smell of smoke and wild sage, her fingers brushing the steam from the mug, and wonder if she was still dreaming. At first, she hardly spoke. Years of being mocked had taught her to make herself small, quiet, unseen. But Nate never filled the silence with needless words. He'd nod at her, ask if she'd slept well, and then go about his work. Slowly, she began to fill the quiet herself. One morning, she swept the cabin humming without realizing it. When Nate returned, he paused in the doorway. "You sing," he said simply. Lily flushed. "I didn't mean to." "Don't stop," he said, setting down his rifle. "Cabin hasn't heard a voice like that in years." That night, they ate together rabbit stew, hot bread. He told us stories from the war, of men who'd carved dice from bone to keep their minds off death, of a general who'd once quoted Shakespeare in the middle of a firefight. She listened, her chin propped on her hands, until the fire burned low. When she finally stood to clear the dishes, Nate stopped her. "You're not a servant here," he said quietly. "I know," she whispered, but she was smiling. Days stretched into weeks. Lily began tending the garden out back, repairing torn curtains, sewing new covers for the chairs. The cabin changed not just the look of it, but the feel. It was no longer a fortress. It was becoming a home. One evening, she found a half-finished carving on Nate's workbench, a small wooden bird, its wings only half-shaped. "You make these?" she asked. "Used to," he said, "for my boys." The pain in his voice was so raw she reached out without thinking, her fingers brushing his arm. "You don't have to stop," she said. "They'd want you to keep carving." He looked at her for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them, and then he picked up the carving knife again. When winter rolled down the peaks, snow piled high against the door. They spent evenings by the fire, the world outside reduced to silence and flame. Nate taught her how to load a rifle, how to build a snare, how to read the sky for storms. She taught him how to laugh again, awkward at first, then easier, until it became part of their nights. Once, as they repaired the roof in biting wind, Lily slipped on the ladder. Nate caught her in an instant, his arms strong around her waist. "You've got to be more careful," he said. "I'm trying," she said, breathless. He met her gaze too close, too long, and for a heartbeat neither moved. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "Let's finish before the light's gone." That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the way he'd looked at her, not with pity, but with something deeper, warmer, far more dangerous. A week later, she stitched a tear in his coat while he sat by the fire. When she was done, she held it out, smiling. "There, good as new." He took it carefully. "You've got steady hands," he said. "Most folks would have tossed it." "Most folks don't try to keep things," she said. His gaze lingered on her. "Then they don't know what's worth keeping." She looked away, her cheeks warming. The silence between them felt different now, not empty, but alive. Later, when she blew out the lamp and the fire settled into embers, she heard him murmur something from his bed by the hearth. "What did you say?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then, "Good night, Lily." Her heart ached in the quiet that followed. "Good night, Nate." Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the cabin, the garden, the trail that led back to Goldstone. But neither of them spoke of returning. The mountain had taken them both in, one scarred by the world, the other scorned by it, and was teaching them how to live again. By late spring, the world around the cabin was bursting with color. Meltwater poured down the slopes, wildflowers painted the meadows, and the air smelled of pine sap and promise. Lily had learned to walk the mountain trails with confidence, now her step sure, her laughter unguarded. She baked bread in the mornings, sang to herself while hanging laundry, and teased Nate when he forgot to eat while working on some endless project in the shed. Peace, it seemed, had finally found them. But peace never lasts forever in a world that profits from cruelty. One afternoon, Nate was away checking traps when Lily went down to the stream for water. She didn't notice the horse tracks until it was too late. A shadow fell across her. "Well, well," said a voice that made her blood run cold. "The town piglet looks fatter than ever." Sheriff Clayton Morse sat astride his horse, 2 armed men behind him. His face was harder, thinner than before greed had burned away the last of his decency. "Thought you could just disappear after that little stunt in Goldstone," he sneered. "That gold nugget bought me nothing but trouble. Turns out it was worth 10 times what that mountain fool thought. And I mean to collect the rest." Lily clutched the bucket to her chest, heart pounding. "You have no right to be here." Morse grinned. "I'm the law, sweetheart. I have every right." He dismounted, boots sinking into mud. "Now where is he?" "The gold man. He stole from me, and I'll be taking back what's mine, you included." Lily stepped back. "He didn't steal. You sold me like property." "Property's what you were," Morse said, voice low and vicious. "And you still are until I say otherwise." The sound of a rifle cocking sliced through the clearing. "Take one more step, Morse," Nate said, stepping out from the trees. He'd been there the whole time, silent as the wind. The rifle barrel glinted in the sun, steady in his hands. "Drop your gun." Morse froze, his smirk faltering. "Blackwood, didn't see you there." "I see you," Nate said, "and I remember what I promised if you ever touched her again." The two deputies shifted uneasily. "Sheriff," one began, but Morse was too far gone for reason. "You can't hide her from the law forever, Blackwood. She's a runaway, and you're harboring town property." "She's no one's property," Nate said, his voice low but sharp as a knife's edge. "She's my wife." The words hung in the air. Lily's eyes widened. It wasn't true not yet, but in that moment she understood why he'd said it. And maybe, in her heart, it already was. Morse barked a laugh. "Your wife? That's rich. The mighty mountain man marrying the town's leftover scraps." He shouldn't have said it. Before the echo of the insult faded, Nate moved not with rage, but with a soldier's precision. He fired a single warning shot that shattered a rock inches from Morse's boot. "The next one goes through your badge." The deputies bolted, spooked by the calm in Nate's voice. Morse staggered back toward his horse, pale and sweating. "This isn't over," he spat. "It is," Nate said, "because if I see you again, it'll be the last thing you ever see." Morse turned and fled down the trail, mud flying beneath his horse's hooves. When the forest was quiet again, Nate lowered the rifle. "You all right?" Lily nodded, though her hands trembled. "You didn't have to lie." "It wasn't a lie," he said softly. "Not if you want it to be true." She stared at him, at the man who had paid a fortune to set her free, who had given her safety without asking for anything in return. Tears filled her eyes. "Nate," she whispered. He took a step closer. "Lily, I can't promise riches or ease, but I can promise you'll never be humiliated again, not while I breathe." The words broke something inside her, something hard, something that had shielded her from hope. She reached for him, her fingers brushing his chest. "I don't need gold," she said. "I just need you." He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if the world outside no longer existed. And for a moment it didn't. That night they sat side by the fire, the mountain wrapped in silence. He took her hand, rough and calloused, against his own. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we'll go to the chapel by the valley. The Reverend comes through once a month." She smiled, tears glistening in the firelight. "Tomorrow, then." Outside, the wind carried the sound of running water and distant thunder. The storm had passed for now. Morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of day when the mountains gleamed like cut glass under the sun. Nate saddled the horse, his movements calm but tight, with purpose. Lily watched him from the porch, a soft shawl wrapped around her shoulders. They had agreed to ride to the Valley Chapel, where a traveling reverend would pass through before noon. But the mountain had other plans. Just as Nate tightened the cinch strap, a distant rumble echoed through the trees, not thunder this time, but hooves. More than one rider. Nate's expression hardened. "Get inside," he said quietly. Lily froze. Is it? Yes. The riders burst into the clearing moments later. Sheriff Morse in front, his face twisted with fury, flanked by 4 armed men. Behind them came a wagon carrying a pair of deputies and something far more dangerous, a judge's crest nailed crudely to the side. Morse shouted, "By order of the county court, Nathaniel Blackwood, you're under arrest for abduction and bribery with stolen property. Hand over the girl." Nate didn't move. You forged those papers, Morse. Maybe, but I'm the law out here, and you'll hang before anyone downstate hears the truth. The men spread out, rifles raised. Lily stepped onto the porch beside Nate before he could stop her. Her hands were trembling, but her voice was clear. You're lying, Sheriff. Everyone in Goldstone knows what you did. You sold me like an animal and took his gold for yourself. Morse smirked. You think anyone will take the word of a whore against the law? The insult hit her like a slap, but this time she didn't flinch. I'm not what you say I am. I'm a woman, and I'm his wife. Nate turned sharply toward her, startled, but Lily didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the man who tried to break her. You called me property, Morse. You called me worthless. But look around, every decent person left this mountain to follow greed like yours. And where did it leave you? Alone, choking on the gold you can't eat. Morse's face went red. Enough! He raised his pistol, but Nate was faster. The rifle cracked once, echoing across the valley. Morse's hat flew from his head, a neat hole torn through the brim. The sheriff stumbled back, staring at the clean line of smoke curling from Nate's barrel. The next shot doesn't miss, Nate said quietly. The deputies hesitated, nerves breaking one by one until one man dropped his weapon. He's right, Sheriff. We're done. Within moments, the group scattered, some into the woods, some down the trail, leaving Morse standing alone in the mud. He looked between them, panting, humiliated. You'll regret this, he hissed. Both of you. No, Lily said softly. We already did. Once. Morse turned and fled, the sound of his horse fading into the distance until the only noise left was the steady rush of the creek. Nate lowered the rifle, exhaling slowly. You shouldn't have stood out here. She smiled faintly. You shouldn't have had to stand alone. He stared at her for a long moment, then stepped closer. When you said it about being my wife, did you mean it? Lily's breath caught. Yes. His hand found hers, rough thumb brushing over her knuckles. Then let's make it true. That afternoon, the Reverend found them still holding hands on the porch. With the smell of pine and the sound of wind for witnesses, he read the vows in a voice steady and kind. There were no rings, no audience, no choir, only 2 hearts that had already chosen each other long before words made it official. When he spoke the final blessing, Nate kissed her gently, not like a man claiming, but like one coming home. Weeks later, word spread down the mountain. Sheriff Morse had vanished, his badge found rusted near a ravine. Some said bandits got him. Others said his own greed did. No one looked too hard to find out. Spring turned to summer. The cabin grew brighter, warmer, filled with laughter and the smell of bread. Lily's cheeks were rosy now, her eyes alive. Nate built her a porch swing overlooking the valley, and each evening they sat together, watching the sun sink behind the peaks. You ever think about that day in Goldstone? Lily asked once, resting her head on his shoulder. Every day, he admitted. It's the day I got rich. She laughed softly. You gave up a gold nugget for me, and got something worth 1,000 mines in return. He brushed his hand over her hair, his voice a whisper against the breeze. You were never the burden they said you were, Lily. You were the reason I stopped running. And somewhere below, in the fading light, the first stars began to rise small, stubborn, and beautiful like hope itself. Summer came to the mountains slow and golden. The last snow melted into the river, and the air filled with the smell of pine, pitch, and wildflowers. Lily sat on the porch one morning, mending one of Nate's shirts, her fingers deft, her heart still learning what it meant to be calm. The cabin no longer looked like a loner's refuge. It looked lived in. A patch of daisies grew along the fence, the garden heavy with beans and corn. Nate had built a cradle in his workshop, a secret gift he pretended not to notice her noticing. He came up from the creek carrying a bucket of trout, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. "You're up early," he said, smiling. "So are you," she teased. He set the bucket down and leaned against the porch rail. "Old habits. Army taught me dawn's for work." Lily looked up at him, the sunlight catching in her eyes. "And what does the mountain teach you?" He thought for a moment. "That peace isn't quiet, it's earned." She nodded, setting aside the mending. "I used to think peace meant being invisible. Now I think it means being seen and still safe." Nate reached for her hand. "Then you're home, Lily. You'll never be invisible again." As the day warmed, they walked down to the meadow below the cabin. The world felt wider here, their shadows long across the grass. She rested her hand over her belly, smiling faintly, and Nate noticed. "How long?" he asked softly. "Almost 3 months," she said, eyes shining. "I wanted to be sure before I told you." He froze, then laughed an unguarded sound, bright and surprised. He pulled her close, lifting her off her feet for a breathless second. "You just gave me something more precious than gold, Lily Patterson Blackwood." She laughed too, tears in her eyes. "You gave me something first a life I didn't know I could have." That night the wind shifted, bringing the faint scent of rain. The fire crackled low, throwing amber light across the room. Lily curled against Nate on the old couch, listening to the storm far off in the distance. "Do you ever think about them?" she asked. "The ones who mocked us?" He nodded. "Sometimes, but not with anger. The mountain took it from me. They can have their noise and their greed. We have this." Outside, thunder rolled softly across the peaks. Lily lifted her head, meeting his eyes. "Do you think it'll last?" He brushed a thumb over her cheek. "As long as we keep choosing it." And in that moment, the world was small, just the two of them, the storm, and the steady rhythm of rain on the roof. No grand finale, no fireworks, just peace earned through pain, and love built where no one thought it could grow. Down in the valley, people still whispered about the day the mountain man bought a girl with gold and vanished into the hills. Some said she ran away again. Some said he went mad. But if you ever climbed high enough, on a quiet morning when the mist rolled low, you could see smoke curling from a chimney and hear faint laughter carried through the trees. And if you listened closely, you might hear her voice soft, steady, and free, singing a tune that once silenced a whole town. Not every story about the frontier is about gold or war or Gunsmoke. Some are about what happens after the gun is set down, when two people, beaten by the world, dare to build something gentle out of ruin. Lily Patterson was never meant to be remembered. She was the girl they mocked, the name they used to fill a night of drinking, but she became something more, proof that even the ones cast aside can still be chosen, still be loved without condition. And Nathaniel Blackwood, the man they called a hermit, the one who once believed gold was all that lasted, he learned that the truest wealth is the warmth of another soul sitting across the firelight, calling your name softly in the dark. Maybe that's all any of us are looking for, a place where we aren't laughed at, a hand that doesn't take, a silence that doesn't hurt. If this story found you tonight, maybe it's because part of you still believes in that kind of love, the kind that doesn't care about beauty or status, the kind that grows steady and real like roots gripping stone. So tell me, where are you hearing this from? A city window glowing over wet streets, a farmhouse wrapped in quiet rain, a small room where you're still learning to forgive yourself for what you survived? Wherever you are, know this: you're not forgotten. And somewhere in the high country of your own heart, a light is still burning for you, soft, steady, and waiting to lead you home.